Okay. Okay, I'll start now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who are joining from whichever part of the world. We have over 1,000 registrations from across the world. So it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the second edition of our webinar series, Let's Talk Land. In this webinar, we will talk about the nature-based solutions. Accelerating nature-based solution is our topic this time. We have a very distinguished panel, but before I introduce the panel, I will give some background about the Global Land Initiative. The Global Land Initiative was started during the Saudi Arabia presidency of the G20, which was in 2020. The initiative was communicated at the Ministers' Communique in September 2020 and formally launched during the leaders' meeting in November 2020. The initiative have the broad global ambition of reaching 50% reduction in global land degradation by 2040. And while it's a G20 initiative, the ambition itself is global. So we are trying to work with all countries around the world to achieve that ambition. The newly established Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework put an interim target of 30% reduction in 30% land restoration by 2030. So we are in a smooth transition from now towards the 2040 goal. The Initiative Coordination Office is based in UN Convention to Combat Desertification in Bonn. And since December last year, we have been conducting webinars. So the first webinar was done in December 2022, and this is the second webinar which we are currently hosting. We have a very interesting panel today. And as I mentioned, we also have a range of participants from around the world. So it's my pleasure and honor to invite Ms. Michelle Kaspers, who is the head of division at the climate policy in the land sector, Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protection in Germany. She joined the ministry in 2002 and has been working in the Directorate for Nature Conservation since 2017. One of her main priorities is the development of the German Federal Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Change and Biodiversity. Today, she will talk about the Federal Action Plan. You have the floor, Ms. Michelle.
Really, thank you so much. And also from my side, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. It is my honest pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to talk about nature-based solutions. So I would like to thank the G20 Global Land Initiative for organizing this webinar. And I really regret that I will not be able to be here until the end due to other important commitments. But NBS is such an important topic that I'm really happy that I'm able to give this talk. We cannot overestimate the importance of this topic. I would like to structure my talk according to three main questions. The first one is, why do we need nature-based solutions? The second is, what approach do we take in Germany? And the third one is, what lessons did we learn so far? So let me start with the first questions. Why do we need nature-based solutions? We all know about the multiple crises that the world is facing at the moment. And nature-based solutions offer us to use synergies. By protecting and restoring each ecosystems, we can reach multiple SDGs at the same time, and this is so important. We know that ecosystems are degrading at the moment, and this causes major risks. They cause greenhouse gas emissions. In Germany, we see this especially with drained peatlands. they cause biodiversity loss, they cause food insecurity, they are threats to the livelihoods of people, and they decrease the ability to adapt. Nature-based solutions can help us to reach our climate and biodiversity goals. We have defined targets on the international, EU, and national level for biodiversity and for climate. And especially for the LULUCF sector, we now have national targets for the years of 2030, 2040, and 2045. And we will not be able to reach those targets without using nature-based solutions. On the other hand, in order to reach all the SDGs, nature-based solutions need strong social and environmental safeguards. And it's good that we have the IUCN global standard, as this helps us to implement those strongly needed safeguards. We need those for the national implementation, but also we have to agree that this is important on the international level. And this is why I'm very happy that we saw so many progresses made on nature-based solutions and on our understanding of nature-based solutions on the international level in the last years. There's the UNEA 5 resolution that was decided on. We tried to put forward nature-based solutions during the German G7 presidency, and I was very happy to see the progress we could achieve. And also the G20 has discussed nature-based solutions under various presidencies, and we have seen that just recently we had at the Sustainable Development Summit in India a webinar on nature-based solutions, which was very successful. I also believe that the G20 Global Land Initiative is a crucial player to advance the debate on nature-based solutions and to accelerate their implementation worldwide. So let me come to the questions, what approach do we choose in Germany? There is a decision from the new or the current German government, which was taken more than 1 year ago to draft a federal action plan on nature-based solutions for climate and biodiversity. And we are expecting that a decision on this action plan will be decided on by the end of March. The draft for the action plan contains 69 measures in 10 fields of actions, and those address all kinds of ecosystems: forests, farmland, peatland, urban and coastal ecosystems, and even more. They are designed to meet the climate goals in the land use sector. And they use the synergies between climate and biodiversity, and at the same time, they generate co-benefits, for example, for adaptation. All the measures are designed to either protect, strengthen, or restore ecosystems. And they should help transform the forms of land use that we are seeing, so that in the future they are compatible with our climate goals. To reach this, we need partnerships with landowners, land managers, and we need to engage with the stakeholders, with the local population. We think this is very important, and we learned that we cannot underestimate this when we drafted the action plan. We went into a very early public participation process, and we saw that there's a very strong interest into what we are doing in this field, as it is affecting the daily life of people. So let me come to what is in the action plan. I already told you it's addressing all kinds of ecosystems, and let me give you 3 examples. One very important example for Germany is peatland rewetting. At the moment, we have annual emissions from drained peatlands that amount to 7% of the total national greenhouse gas emissions in Germany. So we decided that we want to reduce those emissions by 5 million tons by 2030. And therefore, we have to find ways to incentivize farmers for rewetting. And we will have funding schemes, and we will help them develop new values change, as they have to transform the way they use the land. If the land is rewetted, they cannot do agricultural practices the same way as they used to do it before. And this is one example why we need the strong partnerships. We have to convince landowners to follow us on this way to transform their land use. The second example is forest ecosystems. We need to strengthen the resilience of forests, and we want to protect old growth near natural forests. This is the part where we want to strengthen ecosystems in order to have their ecosystem function, their climate protection function in the way it used to be before. On the other hand, we want to have additional contributions to the greenhouse gas emission balance. So we also look to reforestation projects. And the third field I want to touch upon is the near natural water balance. This is a prerequisite for the success in many other fields of action. And we have to change our objective. Before, our main objective was to drain the land in order to have agricultural practice. Nowadays, we know retaining water is even much more important from an adaptation, but also from a climate mitigation point of view in order to strengthen resilience of ecosystems. There's further fields of action addressed in the action plan, for example, soil as an important carbon sink. And in order to reach our goals, we need a broad mix of instruments. We need financial incentives and funding. We will spend 4 billion euros until 2026. We need awareness rising. We need a review of the regulatory framework in order to enable voluntary contributions. We need research, we need MRV, and we need cooperation on the international and EU level. And this is why I'm so happy to engage here today, because international knowledge sharing is a very, very important part of being successful with nature-based solutions. And with this, let me come to the lessons that we have learned so far. We are convinced that we need strong networks and partnerships, internationally, for example, with our International Climate Initiative, but also within the international community. We need strong networks and partnerships on EU level. Just one example is peatland protection. We can only be successful if we do this on EU level, as extracted peat is a commodity that can be traded across the EU. And we need it, of course, on the national level for our action plan. Our länder, regions, municipalities, they are all eager to engage and join forces. The second lesson we learned is that public participation, and especially early public participation, is key. I already talked about that. And we learned that we need to build trust. We have to think from the landowners and land users' perspective. We have to showcase solutions that work. And one example how we do that is with pilot projects that we already have started for peatland rewetting. We have to build that trust that they will be able to make an income on the land, even though we have to do this transformation process. Another lesson we learned is that a single focus on carbon is too narrow. We have to aim for transition to resilient ecosystems and long-term economic perspectives. Sometimes carbon counting brings us to short-term solutions which do not really offer a long-term solution. We need resilient ecosystems as a basis for sustainable business models, and we need new ways of land management. One very important lesson learned is with NBS, we can meet our climate and biodiversity goals, but if we don't work on both goals, we will reach neither of them and lose track of other SDGs as well. And with this, let me close and say international cooperation is really key for scaling up nature-based solutions globally. And therefore, I'm really happy to be here. I'm eager to learn from our colleagues, and I'm happy to join. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Marcel, for your presentation. And as you know, Germany is a world leader in this topic. Because I know that you have a busy schedule and you may not be able to stay till the end, if I may ask you one question before you may be able to leave. We'll be very happy if you can stay till the end, but I would like to ask one question. You know, when I was in UNEP and we were trying to scale up nature-based solution, you know, we came across resistance both from the decision makers as well as from the technicians. And for the decision makers, they had no successful large-scale case studies. For the technicians, they did not have the engineering code of practice, which said if you had X amount of trees, it will defend against Y amount of, let's say, storm surge. So I wanted to ask you, in promoting this concept within Germany, did you have that type of challenges? And if yes, how did you overcome it? Thank you.
To be honest, there's so many challenges. There's so many people you have to convince. There's so many things that people believe where they cannot see the complete picture. And I think this is very important, that we engage, that we tell the story, and that we build this trust that I've talked about before. And one thing we learned is that we cannot engage too much. We really go out there, we talk to all the people already while drafting. And during the participation project process, a lot of people came to us and asked, can we stay in contact? Please offer additional meetings. And this is what we are trying to do already. And what we are building is also a structure, kind of a knowledge hub, which is supposed to reach out to all the people, and also to think about how can we connect within the areas, within the landscape, to the people at their places where they live. And we're thinking about building this kind of network, which we will need. And this is, I think, one way, at least we think, we can tackle exactly this challenge which you describe, and which we experience the same way.
Thank you, Ms. Sale. Indeed, connecting peer-to-peer network, I think, is one of the best way to convince. So thank you. As I mentioned, if you are able to stay back, we'll be very happy. But if we understand if you have to leave. Thank you very much. I now want to invite Dr. Heather Tellis, who is the Assistant Director for Biodiversity and Conservation Sciences in the White House Office of Science, Technology and Policy. Heather Tellis is the Assistant Director of Biodiversity and Conservation Sciences and the Acting Director of the National Nature Assessment in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She has deep experience advancing science and policy that bridges nature, the economy, and people's lives. She provides evidence-based input to the Biden-Harris administration America is Beautiful effort, leads cross-agency action on nature-based solution, and with the US Global Change Research Program, established a National Nature Assessment. Through previous work with the Nature Conservancy and the National Capital Project and the Natural Capital Project, she has designed and informed conservation practice with local communities, governments, and the private sector around the globe. Heather also serves as visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley's School of Public Health. Heather will talk today about the landmark roadmap on nature-based solution, which came out of the White House last November. Heather, we are extremely delighted and honored to have you here. Now you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you confirm that you can hear me all right?
Yes, clear.
Wonderful. Yes, I'd like to start also by thanking the Global Land Initiative for this webinar series and for taking up this issue. We really see nature-based solutions as a critical part of the set of solutions that we need. And so we're very happy to see this being discussed and have the opportunity to contribute. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as my colleague from Germany has already made the case, we absolutely see nature as essential to many of the major issues we're trying to address today. It's really clear to the Biden-Harris administration that we simply cannot achieve national or global goals for climate change, for equity, or for economic prosperity without nature. And so there have been several all-of-government approaches led out of the Biden-Harris White House to improve our ability to understand what's happening with nature, to account for the benefits that nature is providing to society and to the economy, and to grow nature, to increase our investments in nature, again, for its own sake, but also as a critical part of addressing the challenges and achieving the major priorities that we're trying to advance. And so across all of those efforts, one of them is really focused on nature-based solutions, which I'm excited to have the chance to talk to you about today. We recognize nature-based solutions as actions that benefit both people and nature, have seen their successes in many agency activities and with our partners over decades, but recognize that we're nowhere near adopting nature-based solutions at their full potential. Next slide. So I want to share with you the definition that we're using in this federal agency process that I'll be talking about today. This definition is very closely aligned with the UNEA 5 definition, recognizing nature-based solutions as actions, a broad suite of actions that can protect or sustainably manage or restore natural or modified systems, and very importantly, as I'm sure many of you know, to provide benefits for both people and the environment. So this is really the key piece for us in thinking about nature-based solutions. They really need to have these dual benefits, an advance for the environment, for nature, and some social contribution. Next slide. As I mentioned, we do have in some of our federal agencies decades of experience in deploying nature-based solutions for a variety of social goals. Just to give a couple of examples, nature-based solutions have been used for community development, for reducing flood or fire risk, for reducing coastal flooding risk and inland flooding risk, and many other benefits. And it just as a couple of examples of what the U.S. federal government has supported with partners. I actually live in California and so have benefited from and hope for much more investment in nature-based solutions that can reduce extreme forest fire risk, an issue that's increasingly a very present problem for many of us. The U.S. Forest Service and partners have invested in managing forests to reduce fuel loads and to make them less prone to drought and wildfire risks that are extreme. And then in another example, we have the city of New Orleans being supported by federal investments to create a very large-scale urban park that is providing an area for outdoor recreation, education, and flood risk reduction, which is very important in that city. So these are just a couple of examples to reflect the kinds of experiences we've already had with the U.S. federal government in supporting nature-based solutions. Next slide. But as I mentioned, we really see that we're nowhere near the full potential that these solutions can provide. As just one example here, you all may be familiar with, we have had an assessment in the U.S. of our potential for nature-based pathways to provide carbon mitigation potential. The graph here shows multiple different pathways through land use management that can provide carbon mitigation benefits. Together, the cost-effective versions of these could provide up to 1/3 of the national greenhouse gas reductions that we need to reach our national climate goals. And right now, today, we've only realized about 10% of those benefits through land-based investments. So we have 2/3 of our potential still on the table here that we haven't been able to move forward with. Next slide. And of course, mitigation is just one of the benefits of nature-based solutions. Adaptation can also benefit from some nature-based approaches, and we recognize that we have untapped potential there as well. Here's one example of coastal flood risk reduction. That's just one of the potential adaptation pathways. And this is an analysis that showed in the U.S. Gulf Coast and around the Caribbean, in multiple countries, there is still untapped potential for restoration of coral reefs and mangroves to reduce coastal flood risk. All of the dots you see on this map are places where there is cost-effective potential for restoration to reduce flood risk. All of these potential restoration projects clear a 1-to-1 benefit cost ratio, and all the yellow dots would return 15 times more benefit than their cost if implemented. So this again just really shows this untapped potential that we haven't yet achieved for nature-based solutions. Next slide. So seeing all of that is what really led the Biden-Harris administration to more action. And on Earth Day last year, President Biden called for, in an executive order, a report to explore the opportunities to really unlock our full potential of nature-based solutions. And so I was lucky to co-chair an interagency process along with my colleagues from the Council on Environmental Quality and the Domestic Climate Policy Office and 15 agencies across the government. We also held public engagement sessions and a tribal consultation to hear from the public on what they see as barriers to adopting these nature-based solutions and what our opportunities are to remove those barriers. So this roadmap that we released at COP27 last year really has one key point, and that is that we see that nature-based solutions should be go-to options for climate equity and prosperity. And with this set of strategic recommendations, we know how to get there. Next slide. So there were 5 major areas of action that emerged from this report, looking really at the potential for federal action across all of the functions of government. And so I want to say just a little bit more in detail about some of the recommendations in each of those 5 areas. The report includes some new actions by the Executive Office of the President and recommendations for what other federal agencies can do to continue to remove barriers and drive adoption of these solutions. So in the first major area for action, we can update policies. This is obviously very broad, but there are many policies that just by nature of history currently cause barriers to the use of nature-based solutions. In some cases, it's as simple as it not being clear whether or not nature-based solutions are allowed for a certain approach or a program. And so adjustments in existing guidance without changes in policy can make it clear that these solutions are allowed and can open new doors for investment and action. We also see opportunities to adjust permitting processes to help nature-based solutions be able to move forward more quickly. And as in many government contexts, benefit cost analysis is a major information point or analysis point that informs many, many of our federal decisions. And in many cases in the US and in other contexts, the current guidance on benefit cost analysis doesn't always capture or encourage the capture of the ecosystem service benefits that flow from nature-based solutions. So nature-based solutions can sort of take a hit in cost-benefit analysis unintentionally under current guidance. So changing that guidance and updating it could really massively help in unlocking these solutions. And then we also saw opportunities in building codes, where again, it could be more explicit how nature-based solutions can be allowed and encouraged in buildings. Next slide. The next major area for action is in unlocking funding. If we could go back 2 slides, please. One more. Great, thank you. Oops. Okay, we're going to talk about funding sooner or later. Maybe we could go forward 1 slide. There's a lot of opportunities for us to simply allow and encourage nature-based solutions in current funding programs. Many of you are aware we had 2 major laws in the last 2 years that have massive amounts of investment in climate action, but also in infrastructure and development. Many of those funds could be directed to nature-based options if it's really clear in those programs that they're allowed. And so there are many opportunities for the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act funds to be used for nature-based solutions. And so we've made recommendations about which programs have big opportunities to direct their funds that way and how that can happen. We also often hear from our public conversations that it can be difficult to apply for funding for nature-based solutions. And so there's recommendations on how to streamline the application process to reduce those barriers for entry. And then we've made recommendations to continue to look for and use innovative finance models so that we're not just stuck with the current methods of investing in these solutions. Next slide. The next major area for action is in leading with our own federal facilities and assets. In the United States, the federal government manages around 300,000 buildings, which is a major set of assets and a major opportunity for us to implement nature-based solutions ourselves. So there's a picture here of an example of what that can look like. This is the U.S. Coast Guard's headquarters near Washington, D.C. and it has one of the largest green roofs in the world. It also retains all of its stormwater on site and has really contributed to a better work environment for the staff that work there. This is just one example of what could happen in many more federal buildings that would give a place and incentive for nature-based options. There's many other opportunities across the vast federal lands that the government manages to adopt nature-based solutions, for example, for fire management, as I mentioned. Next slide. Another major area that Murali actually hinted at in his question to my German colleague is that often when there is funding and the policies do allow nature-based solutions, we don't have a large enough skilled workforce to build them. And so we heard many constraints and then opportunities for us to build a skilled, market-ready workforce for nature-based solutions. So we have recommendations for specific kinds of tools that could help fill gaps in the capacities that we already have. We identified some skill gaps that seem to be common and needing attention, for example, around construction and maintenance of nature-based solutions. People mention it's different to change out shingles than it is to maintain a green roof, as one example of how maintenance and construction skills are really necessary alongside the other skills that are needed to design and build and maintain nature-based options. We also identified opportunities for our federal agencies to collaborate with professional societies in establishing new certifications or accreditations or standards for the engineering community and for other communities so that it's clear when skills are attained and sufficient to build nature-based solutions. And we also recommend and identified opportunities for our agencies to work with and to fund development of new curriculum from the beginning of grade school through continuing education. Next slide. And then the final area for recommendations is around research, innovation, knowledge, and adaptive learning. Of course, the world around us is always changing. People are always innovating and creating new solutions. And so we need to continue to learn about how nature-based solutions can be effective for multiple different social outcomes and how they can continue to be adjusted and evolved to emerging conditions. We launched an initiative alongside this report, the National Nature Assessment, which is one of our major actions to try and close some of our knowledge gaps around nature-based solutions and other aspects of nature. And we do have a public comment period open now for that assessment that anyone anywhere in the world is welcome to give input on. But we also identified other recommendations for closing evidence gaps. For example, we have more established understanding of how coastal habitats are effective in reducing flood risk than we do, for example, for inland landscape scale watershed management, reducing inland flood risk. So we have some gaps in the evidence base of effectiveness that need to be filled. We also lack a clear understanding of what the scale of the opportunity is for some nature-based solutions. I showed you that graph of the potential for nature-based solutions to mitigate carbon in the US, and a similar analysis has been done globally. We have less of that understanding for other adaptation benefits. And that really can make it difficult in some cases for us to set goals or drive policy towards major change. And across the board, we identified recommendations for improving integrated models that can really show these connections between changes in nature and social outcomes to help us predict and estimate the potential for benefits from these solutions. Next slide. So that gives you just an overview and a high-level introduction to the areas that we covered in this nature-based solutions roadmap that we really see as a primary tool now for federal action to help us make nature our first choice for advancing climate progress, ecosystems, equity, and prosperity. We know this is just the beginning of our path, and we see a lot of opportunities for continued federal action and for continued partnership and collaboration to drive forward the advances that are needed for these to be a major part of our solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Heather. We are extremely happy to see the focus areas because almost all of them, we are also working on the finance issues, on the baseline preparation, on capacity building. So we can see that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for synergy as we move forward our work. I spent some time at the University of California, Berkeley in 2001. So I'm also, in reviewing your CV, I found that you teaching there. So maybe we'll have an opportunity to meet there again. I now have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Shalini Thani, who is a senior scientist at the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute and the vice chair of Asia Pacific for the IUCN Commission on Ecosystems Management. Incidentally, I started my professional career at the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute in 1988. So I'm very delighted and proud to welcome Dr. Shalini Thani, who has been working in the domain of nature-based solution. She has been associated with the UN system for over a decade, and we had many opportunities to collaborate. So Shalini, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Murali, for such a nice introduction. And I think my floor is already set with my previous speakers from developed countries who have already set the momentum on what nature-based solutions are and what kind of global momentum is right now to bring that paradigm shift to reach the sustainability agenda. I'll be talking about and the perspectives, especially from South Asia and especially focusing on India, what kind of enabling policies practitioners and international community in NBS is doing, and what kind of implications it has in countries like India. So can I go to the next slide, please? So I could see a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I thought when I was doing this preparation, and please, sorry for this little shift in the font size. I don't mean to highlight finances, but this is one of the key areas I think that needs to be highlighted when we talk about scaling up nature-based solutions in developing and underdeveloped countries who are also one of the biggest hotspots of land degradation. So finance, connecting people, and of course, MRVs, monitoring, verification, and reporting is something that are the crucial challenges for scaling up nature-based solution. And when I talk about enabling conditions, something that over a decade we have learned, relevance and acceptance, customized solutions, providing incentives to community in whatever they are doing to scale up nature-based solutions that can also enhance inclusion in these areas. Of course, convergence between different government line departments, bringing in innovations in effectiveness, learning from different practitioners and case studies can also bring in a lot of these innovations in effectiveness in next generation of nature-based solutions. And of course, this is all where sustainability lies. That's where we talk about the larger context of sustainability through nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. When I talk about nature-based solution and the involvement of practitioners and international community, I was very fortunate to be part of IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management because they were one of the pioneers in developing the entire agenda of nature-based solution in 2016. And later, they have been pushing this and pioneering this. And this is something that has been now accepted by CBD recently in Sharm el-Sheikh COP and also in Glasgow. It was also included as nature-based climate solutions and has also been recognized by Ramsar and other global discussions. Now, one thing is very important that my previous speakers have also stressed that global standards are there, but there is also need to continuously explore these standards and learn from already available nature-based case studies. And I'm sure there are scattered case studies across the world, but the idea is how to replicate them, how to scale up. So there is need of improving the future versions of global standards that IUCN CEM is still working on. And there has been a lot of work that on awareness generation that IUCN Academy and MOOCs by UNEP, where Dr. Murali and Karen will be talking about that, has already been done for last couple of years. And there has been massive awareness through these courses. Next slide, please. Now, when I talk about countries like India, where there are a lot of different socioeconomic concerns, it is very important to understand that we also understand local needs and aspirations when we implement these nature-based solutions in a very customized approach. So one of these case studies that we did and is recently published in Nature Biodiversity, we highlight that local consultations and need-based assessments are very much required. And our study also says that there is a high biophysical restoration potential, and predominantly this is most of the land tenure is basically private. So going beyond forest areas and understanding that there is a lot of opportunity to focus on agroforestry or tree outside forest landscapes, and also going beyond and carbon and also going beyond forest-based restoration project is something that can really ensure and enhance people-centric collaborations and opportunities in these areas. So this is also where there is a lot of opportunity for policymakers to translate global NBS prioritization for application. Next slide. Now, when I talk about tree outside forest areas, I'm really happy to share that India has been very proactive and one of the pioneers, and this was the first ever policy on tree outside forest by India, the National Agroforestry Policy in 2014 that came up. And there was a huge budgetary allocation also to ensure that these is very nicely enforced on ground. Now, when I talk about agroforestry things and practices, this is not something new. This has been a very traditional approach. And if you see the case studies across the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, or any other continent, you find n number of these approaches, right from shifting cultivations to home gardens to agroforestry, agri-horticulture models, or energy-based plantations that have been highlighted in these kind of approaches. So that's a very welcome approach by Government of India, and not only putting it a public approach, a government approach to influence and enforce this policy, there has been a huge policy support and flexibility to receive private sector funding through corporate social responsibility to this enforcement of this particular policy, and linking it with bond challenge and LDN and NDC targets so that we can think more about beyond forest and beyond tree outside forest landscape. Next slide. So this effort was not only limited to India. The good thing about this was that after 2014 agroforestry policy, the entire South Asian regional group developed a South Asian regional cooperation for agroforestry, and India became pioneer to this, helped Nepal to have its first agroforestry policy in 2019, and later Bhutan also got it, and then now Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are also working on it. So there is a huge potential and huge budgetary allocation from coming in these countries, not only limited to agroforestry, but also thinking for urban forest areas. So for example, Nagar Van Yojana or urban forest scheme, and then Mishti, the recently updated scheme on mangrove plantations or wetland conservation. So there are different schemes through which governments in South Asia are pushing and ensuring these enabling policies to ensure that nature-based solutions are implemented and also upscaled. Next slide. Now, we have the enabling policies for tree outside forest, a good area for nature-based solution, but there is a huge need of inclusion, especially where a larger part of the society is still involved and coming from rural backgrounds. So Manrega has been one significant policy with 260 different activities. This is considered to be one of the biggest world's largest public work program that has helped in implementing different natural resource management efforts and practices and efforts. So there is also a highlight of this particular Manrega Act, and then the activities that are running around Manrega is that it is one of the biggest payment of ecosystem services as well. So there is a huge scope to upscale and see how for last 15 years that has improved, and in next coming years, we can introduce more nature-based solution approaches to these activities. Next slide, please. And then this report is something that many of us are aware about, the report by UN, why we need to have more of private sector financing, because there is still a lot of public sector financing that is feeding nature-based solution. So unless there is private sector support, it's not everything that government can do on ground. So that there is a huge requirement of private sector financing and also engagement that needs to be progressively scaled up in future. Next slide. So we have been working on supporting sectoral involvement and seeing how corporate community partnerships can be developed. For example, specifically on mine closure activities, ensuring that these approaches are very nature-based solution approaches. They also address societal challenges, restoring mine voids and overburdened dumps that are very toxic and contaminated as well. Biomonitoring supported land restoration to ensure private sector is interested, because this also meets the compliance put by government. And then, of course, compensatory afforestation, green belt development, and also CSR, corporate social responsibility, and corporate ecosystem or ecological responsibility are some other areas that can be definitely discussed and are being worked in cooperation in India. Next slide, please. So if I come to one of the few last slides, convergence is the key. We have a lot of things moving around, and partnership is very much required when we talk about convergence. So government line department needs to sit together and think about some of the things where the funding that is to support these practices on ground can be maximized. The output can be maximized by using the funds rationally. For example, forest department, watershed departments, agriculture, irrigation, and also disaster risk reduction departments can really help in developing this kind of convergence. Next slide. So coming to my last slide, if I want to just sum up what can be the main areas to accelerate the momentum for transformating changes through nature-based solution, I think these are the 6 core areas according to my work in last almost a decade. People-centric opportunities, I've already discussed, focusing beyond forest areas, understanding the importance of incentives and involving private sector financing into it, convergence of government line department, CBOs, NGOs, and ensuring MRV takes place. So these are some of the key concerns. And with this, I come to the end of my presentation. Next slide. And I thank UNCCD for this opportunity to share my experiences from South Asia and especially India. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shalini, for your presentation, and the point about convergence is absolutely critical. When you have so many government departments involved with so many programs, if there's a way in which the policy can be aligned. I think Dr. Heather also mentioned about the same point about all of government approach to nature-based solutions. So there's a lot we can learn and share. We will now come to the last presentation of the day, which is from Dr. Karen Setmeyer. Dr. Karen is a senior expert on nature-based solution. She has been working in this domain with UNEP, where I was involved at least since 2008 and possibly before. She has a PhD on nature-based solution, and she has worked on landslide-related nature-based solution, extensive work experience in the Indian subcontinent, but also many other countries. She coordinated a global program on ecosystem-based approaches to disaster risk reduction. Karen, it's always a pleasure to have you as a speaker in our panel. You have the floor.
Well, thank you, Dr. Murley, and thank you again for the invitation. It's fantastic to be here to support the team in this exciting topic of accelerating nature-based solutions and meeting global targets is what I'll focus on. So if you go to the next slide, I would just in a really brief overview like to say, well, in order to know where we're heading, let's see where we came from. And I will also attempt to answer some of the questions that have been raised by participants in the chat. So you can start, go ahead, Devashri, and click us through, go forward here. One of the questions was related to, well, nature-based solutions as a term, and not everybody may agree to the use of the term. Could you go forward, please? Next slides. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. Just keep clicking there. So, I mean, the term nature-based solution was coined by the World Bank in 2009 and was then brought up in some of the UNFCCC negotiations. The IUCN definition that Shalini mentioned came in 2016, along with the global standard around 2019, 2020. And it became an umbrella term under which ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, sustainable land management, they can fit under this umbrella term. Terms may not always be accepted by all parties, but it is a useful, I would say, overarching term. Very important then, we see so the number of scientific publications that's started to really increase and boom in 2020, 2021. And in 2021, we saw a couple of also landmark events. Well, in 2020, we already had the EC Horizon Research Program, which was launched and actually funded over 200 million euros worth of projects on nature-based solutions research projects, funding 30 different European projects on the topic. The US Army Corps of Engineers came out with guidelines in 2021. The World Bank Nature-Based Solutions Urban Catalog came out. Go ahead, keep clicking, go forward, keep going. We had the UNEA definition, which Heather mentioned, and COP27 was also landmark where nature-based solutions were mentioned. The CBD COP15 mentioned the Kunming-Montreal Declaration. Of course, the White House nature-based solutions roadmap is a huge landmark. Click a little bit more, and we're starting to see national nature-based solutions roadmaps. I'll come back to the private sector, which I think is probably one of the most exciting, I would say, landmark events or a series of events that are now on the horizon. Next slide, please. So I would say that the World Economic Forum really provides a litmus test in understanding kind of the mindset of the private sector, and the Global Risk Perception Survey showed that environmental concerns really were on the top of the concerns of the private sector in 2022, 2023. Next slide, please. So keep clicking. Just stop there. So failure to mitigate climate change, biodiversity loss are on the top of private sector concerns over the next 10 years. And very interesting is that private investment in nature-based solutions is quickly evolving. This was alluded to by all of the previous presenters. Can you click again? The carbon voluntary and compliance markets are traded on a daily basis. Keep clicking. The voluntary markets are super interesting in terms of the aviation industry offsets, nature-based offsets, and tech-based offsets. Keep clicking. And interesting is that we're seeing new financial instruments appear in the headlines almost on a daily basis. This one just came out a few days ago showing a new instrument. It's a pension fund that is now available for investing in various types of nature-based solutions. So what is interesting is that the voluntary markets is quickly evolving. But there isn't really a lot of regulation out there. It's a voluntary market. It's likely in the future to, I would say, need a little bit of maturing, and definitely worth keeping our eye on. Next slide, please. So Shalini already mentioned, the slide is a bit blurry, sorry about that, mentioned the UN, the UNEP report, which came out last year. Can you click again? Which shows that around 80% of current current financing of nature-based solutions, various types of nature-based solutions, right? Protection of biodiversity and landscapes, sustainable agriculture and forestry. About 80% is public finance and only 20% are public financial flows. And this will need to be tripled if we're to meet climate change and biodiversity and land degradation targets. Next slide, please. So basically what I want to say is we have three main poles of drivers. I just mentioned the public and private sector investments, and these are really related to various government regulations. We heard from Heather some of the suggestions that are coming from the White House related to permitting, building codes, and the EU has put out quite a lot of regulations that are really driving the sector through the EU sustainability reporting requirements. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which will come into effect in 2024, will require all companies of 500 people and larger to report on any impacts related to environment and social governance. This is to avoid greenwashing. This will also affect foreign companies that are working within the EU sphere. The EU biodiversity strategy also sets out to have high targets for climate neutrality. And all of these types of regulations and the incentives that were also mentioned by Heather, by the White House, are really now, I would say, driving both voluntary and compliance types of investments in nature-based solutions. Very important, however, is the role of research, whether it be funded by EU, by national governments. We really need to have that research on nature-based solutions, performance standards, and effectiveness. Last but not least are consumer preferences and activism. As a consumer, you may prefer to go buy a product that is more sustainable. That is also driving more interest in more protecting biodiversity and in nature-based solutions as well. So let's not forget the role of consumers and practitioners. Next slide. So just as a quick example, I have two quick examples. One is I was fortunate to go to Japan just a few weeks ago, and I visited a wetlands restoration site where they're also doing biochar. And so I saw this for the first time, where basically the concept is they're removing a lot of the bamboo, which is actually encroaching on a wetlands area. And it's this biomass is being burned under anaerobic conditions and then buried into the ground, which is the photo we see on the left. This charcoal is then enhancing the soil. And this is CO2, which would not go out into the atmosphere. Not everybody agrees with the advantages of biochar, but it gives an example of then how nature-based solutions can be applied in on the ground. That was one of the questions in the chat. A local industry is financing this project. In other words, the local industry is looking to reduce their carbon footprint by funding the community to do this work. And this community is also doing the wetlands restoration to reduce flooding. I also just want to mention, and thank you, Shalini, for having shown the slides from the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guaranteed Scheme, which again is one of the largest development projects in the world, and one that I was fortunate to interact with, where it's basically a large cash for work program. There were several questions in the chat about, well, how to finance this. Several developing nations have cash for work programs, which can fund projects such as restoring rivers and coastal areas and wetlands. Next and last slide, please. So just to wrap up, I just want to mention the MOOC. Thank you, Shalini, for giving some advertisement to that, which I developed with Merle when we were at UNEP. It's still active, and we have over 60,000 people registered. More than 12,000 have completed the MOOC. So please join the MOOC and learn more about nature-based solutions. And last slide, thank you very much. Back over to you, Merle. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for this very interesting presentation. And also, I actually didn't know the MOOC is still on and still going strong now, racing towards a target of 100,000 registrations. I'm sure we will get there one day. Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes for question and answers, and we actually have plenty of questions. And speakers, please feel free to answer them on the screen live if you have time, and please feel free to give your answer. More than one speaker could also provide those answers. There's no problem if those answers are not identical, because we all have different opinion about things. So, but I will pick up some of the questions from here as well as YouTube and Facebook and ask them. I want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Tony Simons, the former Director General of ICRAF, in the audience, and he has put a question to Dr. Heather. This is about how can we involve the youth as well as the private sector in building a greener infrastructure and these new green projects, or essentially nature-based solution. Heather, you have the floor.
Thank you. So how can we involve youth and the private sector in nature-based solutions? So I'll try and take them separately with just a couple of ideas. I think with youth, we see a lot of different entry points being created, especially around different kinds of activities. So we have more conventional approaches like getting youth outdoors or creating learning opportunities through schools or after-school programs to help youth have time in nature. But we're also seeing more opportunities, especially through social media, to give youth opportunities to speak about why they think nature is important and to encourage each other to do whatever they can on a day-to-day basis. So I think seeding those kinds of opportunities and encouraging youth to speak with each other about what they can do on a day-to-day basis is really important. On the private sector side, we see a lot of opportunities depending on which part of the private sector we're talking about. We see big opportunities for additional accreditation or certification programs to help identify what those workforce skills are. We see some professional societies like the American Society of Civil Engineers, but others producing new accreditations or new workforce training or skill certification programs. And those are needed in so many different skill sets, some of which I mentioned. So I think any private sector groups that are from the trades or from any of the skill groups who can put forward some clear certification or training opportunities that show how, for example, bricklayers or heavy equipment operators or construction workers can be part of building these solutions are real needs. And then we also have the business line development side where there's a lot of opportunities. We see some of the big consulting, engineering, and construction firms implementing these kinds of programs. They decide what they bid, right? They decide what they put forward. And so they can continue to show leadership in choosing some proportion of their bids where they will put a nature-based option forward. I heard recently from someone who contracts, hires those companies from a local government side say, when we see those proposals that have a nature-based portion, we get very excited. Those are what we want to fund, but we can't choose that option if it's not there. And often those local organizations may not know to ask for it. So the private sector can lead in putting forward proposals and options that include nature-based solutions.
Thank you, Dr. Heather. In fact, I was also very pleasantly surprised that a number of major engineering consultancies have started having a unit on nature-based solutions. I recently came across an advertisement for a number of engineers to be employed in one of these major engineering consultancy, which actually shows that the market for such services are picking up. So I would now come to Dr. Shalini. Shalini, there are two questions. One of them from my good friend, Sergeant Gopalan, who is joining this session. This is about the sacred groves in India and many other parts of the world, and how can the government promote those things and as a nature-based solutions. And similar to that is a question about traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge on nature-based solutions. So maybe you could explain a little bit about the sacred groups and then come to the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Murali. I think sacred groves have been a very traditional approach of conserving natural resources, and especially there are certain sections of forest that have been protected. And this is not only in India, in different states, but also in different parts of the world. Certain taboos were there and certain restrictions were there where you have to follow some sacred norms and regulations to actually protect these forest areas. And that is how these forests have been conserved for last several generations. So there is a lot of traditional knowledge linked to it. But coming to using and integrating indigenous knowledge systems, I think that's a very important question. When we talk about state-of-art, modern scientific ways of integrating into nature-based solution, I think there's a huge opportunity in these local and traditional measures that needs to be integrated in nature-based solution. We worked on one of such approaches where we supported and we try to highlight hybrid knowledge frameworks where we not only focus on scientific interventions, but we try to bring in best of both indigenous and modern scientific ways of nature-based solution implementation. So one thing was very clear, that people know best about their landscapes. And many times these local people also bring in a lot of knowledge in terms of climate sensitivity. So the term and the knowledge of uncertainty is very much there. And that's something that we need to learn from them. And it is also something we plan when we have this planning approach going on from nature-based solution. So right from the implementation, the planning phase, implementation phase, and monitoring phase is something where definitely indigenous knowledge systems can be mainstream and integrated. We developed some case studies. If some of you are interested, you can ask and email us, and we can share those knowledge systems. And then, of course, the sacred grove concept was very much towards restoration and conservation. But if you see the broader perspective of nature-based solution, it is basically addressing societal challenges. So the concern of societal challenge has to be very customized and location specific. So that's where the importance of both sacred groves, certain traditions, and knowledge system very much finds its relevance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shalini. I just want to add that, as you know, India is the current president of G20, and the environmental ministry, which is leading efforts in the environmental front, the Environment, Climate Change, Climate Sustainability Working Group, they would like to promote traditional knowledge on issues of environment and land management. And they're planning to create a database similar to the traditional knowledge digital library, which is there for the medicinal plants, etc. So there is some work going on in that domain. Thank you. So I want to acknowledge the presence of Minister Renia Sotillo from Argentina. And her question is about land-based solutions and how do they interface with the nature-based solutions. So Karen, if I could direct this question to you and see if, how do they interact in this, or any let's say, any inconsistencies you see between the two?
Well, land-based solutions. I mean, for me, what is important is looking at, well, what are the main risks, or what are some of the main challenges in a landscape? And that a landscape be considered in a holistic way. Well, it could also be in a watershed scale, something that Heather also mentioned. What is the scale at which we're working? So when you mention land, well, land also includes water. So if we're looking at, for example, issues related to either too much water or too little water, we still need to look at it in terms of how to manage the land in a certain landscape. So I don't necessarily see any inconsistency with the way we're referring to nature-based solutions, right? So if we, for example, we have an issue with landslides, well, that's land, but it's also related to how much water is coming to a slope, which then creates a landslide. And then working with uplands communities and downstream communities in order to manage a watershed. So I don't really see any inconsistencies. Nature-based solutions, like I said, is an overarching term. And I do respect the fact that it is not agreed to by all governments. We need to respect that and understand the issues related to that. But it has been approved by, I would say, majority of governments at this point, and it's good to at least understand the underlying meaning of nature-based solutions and what it's trying to accomplish through the many different approaches overarching that. I see Heather has her hand up. You might want to help me out there with that question. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Heather, you have the floor.
Sure, thank you. Just add and complement, I think from our perspective, the really important part of nature-based solutions is that they provide a benefit to the environment and to people. So there can be land-based solutions that are not nature-based solutions in our view. As an example, you could plant a fast-growing tree species like a non-native eucalyptus in a certain area, like where I live in California, that could have large carbon and climate mitigation benefits. but it would have negative impacts on the native ecosystem and on the water supply because it's not adapted to that system. So we would not consider that a nature-based solution. It could be a land-based solution to climate change, but we wouldn't consider it nature-based because it doesn't have that environmental benefit side. So that's the only distinction that I would make. I think we have seen some situations where taking a land-based entry point with good intention has had some big unintended consequences that we want to avoid going forward. Just one other example of that might be, for example, non-native evergreen species planted in the Paramo in Latin America. Again, a fast-growing tree that has some big negative consequences for the local ecosystem. So just thinking about that balance between an environmental outcome and a human outcome are important from our view.
Yeah. If I may just add to that, thanks, Heather, for helping me out on that one. It's true, we have to look at nature-based solutions to what? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And in most of the references to or definitions of nature-based solutions, biodiversity is included as either a main outcome or as a co-benefit. And so I think the example you gave, Heather, of planting trees, which may absorb CO2 but have other negative impacts on the environment, is something that really needs to be taken into consideration. Thank you. Back over to you, Murali.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr. Heather. One of the things which the Global Land Initiative is planning to do is to create a new methodology for assessment of such nature-based solutions which are coming out, or restoration solutions which are coming out, because mostly the implicit assumption among people are that a restoration is always good. But as Dr. Heather mentioned, sometimes it may not be. It may meet one requirement, and I think there are a number of questions in the chat about fixing carbon, but how long it will stay, and so on. So yes, indeed, one has to look at these solutions more holistically. We may have just time for just one more question. So maybe I'll ask Dr. Heather. You mentioned there is this potential for implementing nature-based solutions in up to 300,000 or 700,000 federal buildings. And I think this is indeed a huge opportunity, because not only in sheer numbers, but also its demonstration effect it will have on other people who are going to see the building, but also globally. So is there some sort of a strategy you are thinking to promote this? Will it be some sort of a federal guidance on how to do it, or will it be some sort of federal support, financial or otherwise, to do that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So 300,000 federal buildings. And there are a few conversations happening now. There are two different major standards for building codes for federal buildings, one for civilian buildings and one for military buildings and facilities. Both of those already have some encouragements or requirements for nature-based inclusions, but those could go further. So that's one mechanism that may be part of how that becomes encouraged. There's also procurement requirements and climate adaptation plans that the agencies are in the process of updating. And so guidance on those climate adaptation plans is another avenue we're thinking about to help agencies understand how they can upgrade, retrofit, or contract new buildings that have more of these nature-based options built in.
Thank you, Dr. Heather. I think with that, we are coming to the end of the webinar. I want to thank all the speakers for their presentation and agreeing to join very early in the morning from the US and midday. And thank you, speakers. We will be back to you, not only, because this is a long journey. We have, our target is 2040, 2030 is the midpoint. So we will be back to you to work together, but also to talk together on these topics. I want to thank the audience. We had close to 400 audience consistently through the session. which is very impressive for a webinar. I want to thank the audience from around the world, and I know for some of them it may be already very late in the evening. Last time we had participants from 100 countries. So if you have someone from Australia, maybe it's already close to midnight or even past midnight. So I want to thank the audience. There are a number of people who are working behind the screen to make this a success in preparing it, promoting it. So I want to thank my team, the IT team, technical team, communication team for making this event a success. Please follow the Global Land Initiative on our website or social media channels. As I mentioned, we plan to have at least one webinar every 2 months. We also plan to have a brown bag lunch, which will also stream once every 2 months. So every month we will have one event which is related to land restoration, nature-based solutions, and matters relating to developments in these areas. So with this, I thank you all, and I wish you a good evening, good night, good day, good morning. Bye-bye.
Thank you and goodbye.